Hello, everyone, and welcome to another weekly walk. And I want to thank you all so much for again joining us on this lovely Wednesday. Now, this week, we're going to be celebrating one of our favorite holidays here in New York City, St. Patrick's Day. So on our walk, we're going to examine, of course, just a few landmarks in Central Park that have been influenced by the Irish American community. Now, before we begin, of course, we'll get started off with the Zoom control features. So again, if you'd like to chat with us, go ahead and use the chat function. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function. And we actually have Desiree joining us on the back end today, answering any questions that you folks might have. So we've also enabled closed captioning as well, which you can turn on and off on the Zoom control panel. And throughout the walk, we'll also be showing some historic images from archives like the New York Public Library, the Library of Congress, and the Central Park Conservancy. And of course, our mission here at the Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. All right, folks, so let's get started. So the Irish, of course, have had a celebrated history here in the United States, and much of that is due to the many generations of immigration since the 1600s. Now, the earliest immigrants from Ireland were generally more diverse than those that came later on in the 1800s. So many were, in fact, actually Protestant, and they came from the province of Ulster, settling in places like Appalachia. By the 1840s, with the Irish potato famine, more than 1 million Irish Catholics would end up moving to the United States, including right here in New York City. Primarily, they might have settled in places like downtown, like 5 Points, but also in uptown neighborhoods like Seneca Village. Now, today we're going to check out just some of these places here in the park that the Irish have helped to shape. So let's go ahead and get started off with, of course, our handy map. So we're going to make our way from the east side of the park at 64th Street and then head down to Grand Army Plaza. From there, we're going to make our way north through the landscapes like the pond, the dairy, and the mall as well. And finally, we'll end things off over at Bethesda Terrace. All right, so we begin here along 5th Avenue and 64th Street. Directly ahead, we have the Arsenal building, which actually predates Central Park by around a decade. As such, it's been used over time for a variety of different purposes. So at one point, it's been used as a police precinct, park offices, and a museum as well. Originally, as the name might suggest, the Arsenal was supposed to house weapons and ammunition for the New York State Militia. In fact, if we take a closer look at the main entrance, you might actually notice a few details inspired by military motifs. So here you'll see things like war drums, spears, muskets, cannons, and they pretty much make up the primary elements of this doorway, which of course makes sense since, considering its history as a munitions depot. Now, just off the side of the Arsenal building, you'll see these gates that lead into the Central Park Zoo, which once housed, or rather was once housed inside the Arsenal itself during the 1800s. These days, the zoo now functions as its own self-contained area within the boundaries of the park. The zoo is actually managed by something called the Wildlife Conservation Society, which handles other famous zoos, such as the Bronx Zoo. Now, folks, by this point, many of us have actually heard about Flacco, the Eurasian eagle owl, who, of course, escaped from the zoo last month and has become something of an internet celebrity. As of this moment, Flacco is still loose in Central Park. However, he has been spotted in places like the North Woods, where he likes to feast on rats and other small rodents. Now, in case you folks were wondering, during the spring bird migration season, the Central Park Conservancy actually stops putting out rodenticides. Once he's back out of the park, however, is really where the real danger is, since the city uses rodenticides a little bit more frequently throughout the year. If you'd like more updates on Flacco, you can check out this really fascinating article that was recently published by the Audubon Society. So we'll leave a link in the chat, but definitely do check that out. It's a really fascinating read. All right, so moving on, and we get this nice historic image of the Central Park Zoo from the early 1900s. Initially, the zoo was actually called the Central Park Menagerie. The menagerie was one of the most popular areas of the park. And by 1902, it attracted something like about 3 million visitors each and every single year who flocked to see its lions, its tigers, seals, and other exotic creatures. So here's an image from the early 1900s, right at its peak. A couple decades later, by 1934, it would then be renamed the Central Park Zoo. Now, one of the zoo's most famous sons was Governor Alfred E. Smith, who actually lived directly across the street on Fifth Avenue. Now, Al Smith was known as a major figure in 20th century American politics. He was also the first person of Irish Catholic descent to be nominated for the presidency. And he was a beloved figure, especially amongst the Irish American community here in New York City. Now, in 1934, during the ceremony for the reopening of the zoo, Al Smith was actually presented with the title of Honorary Night Superintendent. He was actually quoted as saying that of all the degrees and titles conferred upon him in his long career, being a night superintendent for the Central Park Zoo was something that he considered to be the highest honor. All right, so let's go ahead and continue on with our walk. And as you folks can see, we're now heading south along the pathway known as Ween Walk, which then leads directly to the Grand Army Plaza entrance. And Grand Army Plaza, I think, is home to one of the most opulent statues in all of New York City. This one depicts the Union Army General William Tecumseh Sherman, who led Northern troops to victory in the last year of the Civil War, as well as the figure of the Greek goddess Nike. Now, this statue was unveiled in 1903. So right around the time when cities like New York were beautifying their streets with grand works of public art. The Sherman statue was actually crafted by the legendary Augustus St. Gaudens. Even though St. Gaudens is usually associated with the American art scene of the late 19th century, St. Gaudens was actually born in Dublin, Ireland, to a French-Irish couple. He was around 6 months old when his family made the move to New York, and like so many immigrants at that time, they passed through Ellis Island. As one of the leading Gilded Age sculptors in the country, St. Gaudens, or rather many of St. Gaudens' famous works can be found in cities like New York, Boston, and Chicago. And however, as a Dubliner by birth, he was also really quite compelled to create the statue of the Irish nationalist leader, Charles Stewart Parnell, which actually stands today in Dublin. So he really is, in the past as well as today, very much a beloved artist, both here in America and in Ireland. So moving on from Grand Army Plaza, we're going to head back onto the walls of the park, but we'll need to cross the very busy street first. And as we head in, we can start to see the very hilly topography of Central Park. Now, compared to the very busy street, just outside, what we're doing now is we're now stepping into a world that's much quieter and much more bucolic. So up ahead is actually our next stop on our walk. And this is going to be one of Ireland's favorite sons, Thomas Moore. Thomas Moore was an Irish poet best known for his lyrical ballads that usually celebrated Irish themes, like its people, its music, its landscape, and whatever else. His best known work was a book of collected poems called Irish Melodies, which today is still widely read by many of his fans. He also wrote a history of Ireland back in the 1820s. The statue that we're looking at, this one itself was unveiled in 1880, so on the 101st anniversary of the poet's birth. And it was actually funded by a group called the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick, which was an Irish-American group, or rather is still active today. This is actually one of the many monuments and memorials in the park that were donated by various ethnic national groups throughout the turn of the 20th century. Other statues that were donated would include statues that were donated by the Italian community, the Spanish community, the Germans, and the Scots. It was a way for many immigrants at that time to leave their mark on New York City. All right, folks, let's go ahead and pause right here and conduct our very first poll of the day. So today, since we are actually celebrating, or rather this week, we're celebrating St. Patrick's Day, I wanted to ask you folks, have you ever visited Ireland before? Now, this is a pretty straightforward question. I myself have never been, but I've had friends and family that have actually partaken in the experience, and they all say that they've really, really loved going out to see Ireland. All right, so let's go ahead and end off our poll right now and share the results. All right, so it looks like a little bit less than half of you have been to Ireland before, whereas about 54% has not yet been to Ireland. I would include myself again in the latter half right here, but I definitely would like to visit and check it out one day for myself. All right, folks, so let's go ahead and move on with our tour now. And from here, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the map. And of course, we're going to continue right on up the pathways. Now, as we wind our way through the promenade, we can see that the landscape is still very much in winter mode with all the bare branches on the trees. But if we examine some of the plants a little bit more closely, we'll realize that signs of spring are now starting to emerge all around us. So one of the most dependable markers of the new season, of course, are these trees right here. We've seen these before in other weekly walks. These are going to be dogwoods, also known as cornelian cherries. They're usually one of the very first trees in Central Park to bloom right after winter. And if you're like me, you're probably just itching for the warmer months to come already. So the sight of these blooms can be really, really encouraging. And here's another harbinger of the spring season. These are crocuses. Crocuses are best known for their intense beauty, and they can come in many shades, but blue and purple seem to be popular favorites. Now, crocuses can bloom very early on in the year. So combined with the yellow flowers of the dogwood, these plants can really add a pop of color to an otherwise bleak and wintry landscape. All right, so let's move on, folks. And at this point, we're steadily making our way through some of the busiest sections of the park. Right ahead on the left is the dairy. So we're currently walking roughly where 6th Avenue would meet with 64th Street. And just past the dairy, we come to the stop or the top of this archway that goes right over one of the transverse roads. And looking down, we can see the busy street traffic of Manhattan as it passes through Central Park. Now, before Central Park was constructed in the 1850s, this part of town had a lot of low-lying land that created quite a bit of swamps and muddy ground, some of which were actually later filled in and paved over to create these transverse roads. Now, because the land was pretty swampy and very, very muddy, you might have found plenty of small pig farms and other small-scale agriculture around this area. These farms were run by recently arrived Irish immigrants who started coming into New York in massive numbers starting in the 1840s, primarily because of course, the Great Famine that affected their food supplies back home. The bulk of the neighborhood of Pigtown was concentrated a little bit further downtown by 57th Street and 5th Avenue, but there were also a few pig farms around this section of the neighborhood as well, so as far north as 64th Street. Now, it should be said that the Irish also lived in other sections of the city as well. And in fact, here in Central Park, the other main settlement where they might have lived, especially in the 1850s, would be in Seneca Village, which is located, of course, along the west side of the park by the West 80s. All right, and we are now moving on. And from here, we're going to start heading north towards the mall, which is, of course, just a few minutes walk away off towards the north. Now, here, this lower portion of the mall is officially designated as Literary Walk. And judging from all these statues, it's easy to see exactly why. So many of the monuments here in this area, these are going to be dedicated to writers that were widely read in the mid-19th century. So folks like Shakespeare and Robert Burns, they're going to be well represented here. Another famous literary figure in this section is the Scottish novelist Sir Walter Scott, who wrote the books Ivanhoe and Rob Roy, both of which remain classics to this very day. Now, even though he's better known for his contributions to his native Scotland, he was also deeply fond of Irish culture and history, and the people of Ireland reciprocated that love for Scott. So in the summer of 1825, for instance, he took a tour of Dublin, where he got the chance to admire its famous cathedrals, institutions, bookstores, and libraries. Apparently, he was also supposed to meet up with Thomas More during this trip, but for whatever reason, More was not able to attend. But it would be fantastic to see exactly how that would have gone down in the history books. All right, and now we continue up the promenade of the world famous mall. Now, if we walk far enough, we'll arrive at the concert ground, which is, of course, anchored by the neoclassical numbered bandshell with its very lovely limestone facade. Now, since musical performances were such a major part of this landscape, some of the architectural and artistic details in this section, they're going to reference this musical aspect of Central Park's culture. So right across from the bandshell, for instance, you're going to find the bust of Beethoven, arguably one of history's most famous composers. Nearby, you'll also come across this bust of a very famous Irish-American musician by the name of Victor Herbert. Today, he's not really well known as well as some other figures represented in the park, but he was very influential in his day. For one, he founded something called ASCAP, which is the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, which today is best known as the group that handles musicians' royalties. Herbert was beloved by those in the Irish community in America, even though he was born in France and raised primarily in England. His Irish identity never faltered throughout his life. And in 1916, he was even named president of the Friends of Irish Freedom. In that same year, he also composed an operetta called Eileen, which was inspired by the Easter Rebellion against British rule of that same year. So the Irish press, as you might expect, loved it so much that one reporter even wrote that Victor Herbert has, quote, sounded the heart of the Irish nation and made of that sound a harmony, which is a really fantastic, beautiful, amazing quote. So popular musicians like Victor Herbert often played right here at the mall. And here's one such concert from 1912. And here you can still see the old bandstand. As one of the most popular places in the city at that time to attend a musical performance, the concert ground frequently attracted very large, massive groups of people. So Herbert himself was a household name, especially to many Irish Americans right here in New York City. And here's Victor Herbert, along with some of his very famous friends. Over on the center, we have Irving Berlin, and on the right-hand side is John Philip Sousa. So Herbert died in 1924, but his friends, they did raise the necessary funding to erect a statue here in Central Park in his honor. So without both Berlin and Sousa, we really would not be talking about Herbert today. All right, folks, and moving on, we finally arrived at our last final stop. This is Bethesda Terrace, which contains some of the grandest architectural elements in all of the park. So with everything going on around here, some of these details are easy to miss. But if you know where to look, you'll find hidden gems like this one, which is, of course, a carving of a witch, as well as a jack-o'-lantern over on the bottom right-hand side. The carving is part of a series that represents day and night. In this case, this whimsical Halloween scene represents all of the fun happenings that take place after dark. But why Halloween, you might ask? It's often been said that this particular carving is an homage to the many, many, many Irish laborers that helped build Central Park in the 19th century, since Halloween started off as a Celtic tradition called Samhain. Now, at that time, Halloween was just starting to become a popular holiday in America. So folks generally associated Ireland with this brand new holiday. There were thousands of laborers of Irish descent that helped physically build up the park as well. So in the years 1858 to 1860 alone, upwards of something like 3,600 Irish laborers toiled long hours of the day, essentially hauling cartloads of dirt for something like around $1 to about $1.50 a day. In some cases, these laborers used gunpowder to blast through some of the rock outcrops and builders. There were also other workers as well, like higher paid skilled workers like stone masons, and they created some of the carvings on the terrace itself. By the way, the view in the illustration is, we're actually looking at it from the mall during its construction. So this hill off in the background, this is actually where Rumsey Playfield is located today. All right, folks, so we'll wrap things up for the day right over here. But as we've seen, just kind of walking around Central Park, the park really was influenced quite a bit by the Irish American community of New York City. So not only did they live within the boundaries of what would become Central Park throughout the 1850s, but in some cases, they even helped build vast sections of it. All right, folks. So don't forget to check out some of our other tours and programs on our website. This month, in celebration of Women's History Month, we're going to be launching our Women in the our Women in the Park tour. Now, tickets are still available, so please go and check that out in the chat section. But again, I do thank you all so much for joining us. You can follow us on our social media channels. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. You can use the handle at Central Park NYC to connect with us. Now, from everyone here at the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe and be well. Have a good day, folks.